Morning if you are in the Eastern time zone, and welcome to Vet Talks. This is the Adapt, Improvise, and Overcome podcast, where we explore and focus on the mindset that helps all people, but particularly our service members, overcome physical, mental, and even spiritual hurdles, and is the force often behind that thing which we call creative destruction. And in the military, we often think of destruction as sort of kinetic stuff, but we're also talking here about how this mindset helps our military members innovate. And this innovation is so important. Today is absolutely critical for our corporations to innovate in order to survive and compete in this crazy and dynamic work environment. And in the military, innovation is often the matter of life and death. And so how do these things come together? How do these military members have these great skills? And where are these skills? Where do they come from? How are they applied? And how are they applicable, of course, to their careers post their military service? That's all part of what we talk about here at Vet Talks. And really the intent here is to expose these great stories. They're not the war stories necessarily, and they're not necessarily the sob stories, but rather the stories of every person in between and the great stuff, the great work they do, and a great invention and innovations that they come up with on an everyday basis. So I'm welcome to the show, and I'm glad to have you here. Thank you very much. So let me introduce myself now more specifically, now that we have our guests here. So my name is Christian Anschuetz. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. You know, that slide says retired after my name. That's got to be fixed. I'm not retired. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served 2 tours of active duty as a officer in the United States Marine Corps, and I got out after 1998. So it seems like just yesterday, but actually it was quite a while ago. Since then, I've been very blessed and lucky. I've been a successful entrepreneur and then a corporate executive, and most recently founded Project Reload, which is the parent company and organization of Vet Talks. Again, our purpose and our mission is to really help corporations understand the quality, the character, if you will, of our veterans, and why hiring them isn't simply something noble. It's not something just that we should do for diversity and inclusion. It's because it makes good business sense. And this podcast is about bringing out these stories and illustrating what our military members do and why that sense, well, it's so sensible. Anyway, our guest here today, let me do some introductions here. So we have a couple impressive guests. First, let me go to the returning guest here. On the screen here, you will see somebody by the name of Mike Dana. He's also known as Lieutenant General Dana, USMC retired. That's where retired is actually used correctly. 37 years in the United States Marine Corps. And I'm going to read a quick bio here. Mike Dana is an expert in strategic planning, organizational efficiency, and problem solving. I think the expert word is probably a little bit on the soft side here. He recently retired after 37 years of service in the Marine Corps, having last served as the director of the Marine Corps staff. That, for everybody else, is, well, that's the chief of staff for the United States Marine Corps, one of the most storied organizations, storied brands in the history of the United States. During Mike's decade of service, he was the head logistician. I said it right this time. The Marine Corps, deployed 10 times. I mean, he almost made it to a baker's dozen, Mike. What the heck? And served on joint duty 3 times, including the Indo-Pacific. He has developed particular expertise in autonomous systems, a Marine in autonomous systems, and additive manufacturing. Holy cow, that's another one. Our military members are in autonomous systems and additive manufacturing? Well, in fact, yes, they are. Mike is an executive fellow. Very impressive, with the Institute for Defense and Business. He holds a master's degree from the Naval War College and is a graduate of the School of Advanced Warfighting. Of course, he has a bachelor's, and that's from Union College out of New York. Mike, welcome back, as a matter of fact.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate it.
Now let me get to this newer face here. Newer, but not totally new. I know Joe Boggio from way back, as you might expect as a podcaster, a webcaster, radio show. You might expect that we bring in people that we know. Mike and I didn't know each other, but Joe and I did. Joe is a Project Reload alumni, and he has a very impressive background. He gave me some speaking notes to speak to here, and I'm going to introduce him the way he wanted me to. Let me just say that he understates. It's a chronic thing that I find, actually, interestingly, a lot of really great leaders do. It's not about what I did, right, Joe? It's about what the organization did, and you were just happened to be part of the team that made it happen. So just some highlights from what Joe said here. Joe is from Three Rivers, Michigan. All right, we're broadcasting right now from Michigan, and as the son of a Navy chief warrant officer, he grew up in professionally rich tech firms. So really, real tech firms like Oracle, like Microsoft. Actually, that's where I met Joe. He was a leader at Microsoft and in their innovation practice. And about a decade ago, transitioned into professional services with a great company called Capgemini and helped lead their innovation practice at that great firm. Joe has a few obsessions in life. Oh, I missed, by the way, he recently left Capgemini and moved on as a partner, new partner at the Trium Group. I hope I'm saying that, Trium Group. Joe has a few obsessions in life, and of the ones that I can speak to, these are the ones that fueled his career. One of them is innovation, and the other one is leadership. For nearly 15 years, innovation has been Joe's job. He has built organizations, he's invested in companies, and he has advised firms on the topic of innovation and emerging technology. A few years ago, his obsession with leadership, his second and newer obsession, brought him into a career transition where he began to study leaders and how to develop future leaders, all the while, and this isn't in the notes, but he'll tell you this, where he constantly works to develop and improve himself. All that led him down a path that took him to several places, one of them which was here with Project Relo, and ultimately to this new opportunity that he's with or part of with the Trium Group. And he works with senior teams and the most senior leaders to help them navigate the most complex leadership and team performance challenges and help them go from being the average firm to being the exceptional standout firm. Joe's on a personal mission to inspire and develop leaders. And he works with the people that have the capacity and the mindset needed to address those problems, and again, to be exceptional. Gentlemen, to both of you, Joe most currently, since I did Mike's intro first, welcome both of you.
Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, Mike. So honored to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you both here. So, hey, let's get into the show here. So this is a specific topic here for today. This, Mike's joining us from our previous show, which is where the topic was future war. And it was, what does the future of the battlefield look like? And we started to touch on how important is innovation going to be, is even now, to winning the future wars and the future battlefields of tomorrow. And Joe, you're joining us to kind of continue that conversation and start to infuse this perspective of what does it take to, I think someone's echoing a little bit. What does it take to innovate and win for companies in these future battlefields that they are encountering, right? So there's battles everywhere. There's the kinetic battles of tanks, bombs, and bullets. And then there's the battles of investments, winning with the right customer segments. And all these battles are against really aggressive forces that are often emergent, and we don't understand them, and they don't really look exactly like they looked before, which makes them even more of a threat. So that's the topic for today. And the first thing we're going to get into, Mike, why don't you, if you would, can you just take a couple minutes and introduce your background for those of you that didn't use your intro before?
Before I do that, Christian, I want to make sure that the audience knows that the reason I'm still married after 30 years is because I deployed 10 times. That's the wife always tells me that because I wasn't around, so it's good. But seriously, thanks for having me on again today. Born and raised upstate New York. Dad was a New York State police officer, 6 uncles in World War II. My favorite one was a Marine in World War II, so I decided to become a Marine, which, and just had the absolute pleasure for 37 years leading the best men and women on the planet. Mission focused, just motivated every day, disciplined, and innovative. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But really appreciate being on the show today. And Joe, it's really great to have you. You had great comments before, and can't wait to hear more. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Joe, what kind of intro statement you got for us as we kick this thing off?
Good question. I'm going to tell a quick little story on as I look at this audience or the speakers here, one of these things stands out. I'm not a veteran, but the role that veterans played in my life was pretty profound. And yeah, I've had an interesting innovation background, but there's a distinct couple of guys that shaped me into that path and allowed me to go do those things. And one was my dad, who was a career veteran in the Navy, and I'll throw my mom in there too, because in retrospect, she's carrying a lot of weight to raise a family while someone's deployed for a decade. And then the other was a teacher that I had when I was about 16, John Capella, Mr. C, who was a teacher at a trade school I went to, and I was a super, super shy kid and no confidence at the time. So as a former Marine officer, machine gun, a helicopter machine gun operator, and all these amazing things that he did, day one, I think he saw my anxiety and he's like, hey, starting tomorrow, you're going to be kind of the lead of the class. You got to kick it off, run it. And, when things aren't up to the standard, you got to be the one to call them out. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh man, what are you putting this on me for? And then, but he backed it up. He's like, I'm going to teach you and teach the rest of the class what it means to follow. Because if someone doesn't follow you, they got me to deal with. And, so he helped me develop the confidence needed to then go to college and go do all these other things. So, years later now, I see the impact that they had on me, and I have a pull to pay that forward to people I know and work with, and younger talent, helping them find awaken the leader that is within them, as they both did to me. So.
Well, you said a whole bunch of great stuff there. There's two things I want to key off on before we kind of get into the necessity of innovation to win on these future battlefields. And the first one is the best leaders have to be the best followers first and foremost. And in the military terms, that's actually why things like, boot camp exist. But this old idea where, and Joe, I've used this phrase so many times, and I learned it from you, this fortification of the executive ego. This becomes a real problem because in so many cases, our most senior leaders forget that they still need to follow. And in fact, they often, candidly, they need to follow their followers, right? That's how real the best organizations work. And that's how innovation actually works. I've never seen anybody ahead of innovation that was responsible for all the innovation. And so that was a great point that you made there. The other one is just a quick nod. Family members, spouses, et cetera, of our military members, they do not get anywhere near enough credit and recognition. If everybody that's listening now or maybe in the future, we could just give a round of applause to our and a toast and a cheers to the spouses and family members of military members, the amount of strength, resilience, and otherwise fortitude that these folks have in order to support the women and men that are those frontline folks that are deployed or on bases, domestic or foreign. It's amazing, and they deserve a hell of a lot more credit than they get, period, end of story. So, Joe, thanks for those two triggers. Let's get into this. So, the previous topic was, innovating on the battlefield in order to win. I just want to get your thoughts. I mean, this whole idea of innovation is innovation really? I mean, it's talked about in business all the time. It's talked about in the military organically. I mean, it just happens because necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is the mother of innovation in so many ways. Is it really that scary of a place in the shall we say the private sector or the corporate world? I mean, do firms really need to innovate in order to win, or is this just something that these expert firms like to tell us to get us a little scared to buy some professional services here and there? Who's got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to get us rolling with that. After a lot of years trying to advocate and provocate and basically stage interventions with senior leaders to evoke some outcome in their thinking and awaken a greater sense of responsibility to caring and nurturing the firm or the organization into a new era. A couple takeaways that I think are pretty powerful and a little scary is, how much do you think Amazon spends in research and development per month? Any idea?
That's an interesting question. So I'll give you two answers. The first one is I don't know. And the second one is I would say I'm unsure if anyone knows, because it's so organically built into their culture that there's probably a lot of spend in terms of direct spend and indirect spend as an effort that is really innovation work that they don't even necessarily capture. But I'm quite sure you have a better answer. So please, what is it?
It was a great, great answer. 2 billion a month, roughly. Microsoft's over $1 billion, Google's over $1 billion. That's not including all the VCs, venture capitalists, all the entrepreneurs and inventors, et cetera. So the supply of innovation, when I started in my innovation world, there was no iPhone, right? Facebook had 50 million users. The world is a different place today. And if we were to just name between us, start naming deeply transformational forces, quantum, cyber, social, mobile, cloud, AI, ML, we could go on for 2 hours. And odds are we don't even barely understand them. And the supply is relentless and inevitable and extremely powerful. So one is just the inevitability of the supply. And the second is our ability to ingest those inside of one, cognitively, just to even understand what those things are. And two, to condition our companies to be more capable of absorbing these things, or our militaries. But the key one for me that I would focus on is, and you all come from the world of VUCA, right? And that it's a common word for you. That word is now more and more common in the business world. And you got two choices. You can either try to simplify things and slow things down to reduce complexity and ambiguity, or you can increase your ability to hold complexity and absorb complexity into your thinking as a leader and into your organization, and the things that you oversee. So those are a couple that I think innovation isn't about developing new proficiencies in yourself and in your organization so that you can serve more effectively for what you're focused on.
So really great content. I want to go to Mike. You can say anything you want, but one of the things
I'm going to say we need Joe as an advisor of the Marine Corps. I mean, what he just said was absolutely brilliant. But if I could, there's a lot to unpack with what he just said and a lot of great thoughts. I say the first thing is that in terms of the modern battlefield and its complexity, I mean, it's always been complex. I mean, since people were throwing sticks and stones and arrows at each other. But if you look at future war on how lethal with precision munitions and how many things are going to be going on at once, he really hit on something. Is are you able to distill that complexity down and make good decisions? And how do you do that? And I think with the military, there's two approaches, and we're in an inflection point. Because in the past, what we've done is use what they call maneuver warfare, or mission command type orders, which are when you go into battle, you give your subordinate leaders, and I don't mean subordinate as lower on the food chain, I just mean younger in rank and out there at the tip of the spear. But you give them an objective, and you give them the resources to achieve that objective the best you can. But it's people are dying, bullets are flying, a lot of things are going on. And they, with their own personal cognitive ability and experience, can work through the challenges of that modern battlefield. And I think the inflection point that we're at today and in the future is that with a totally censored environment, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that potentially you'll be able to aggregate all that data and information through your sensors, not only your human cognitive and perception sensors, but through machines. And then those machines can distill that information down where you can take very logical and likely to succeed actions. We're not there yet because combat's still chaos. I mean, we do have what I call machine enhancements to a degree, but not to where I think where Joe is heading in the future. So that's one thing. The second quick point I've got is if you don't innovate, you lose or you die. And the example that I'll give, and it's a great short book, it's called Strange Defeat by Mark Bloch. And he was a World War I veteran, French infantryman, saw a lot of combat in World War I. Becomes a historian in the interwar period, very famous very well read, published. And he's a staff officer in World War II when the French get beat in 6 weeks. And he writes this book, Strange Defeat, after that defeat, and says the reason we lost was a failure of the mind, that we failed to grasp the complexity and the emerging technology of the 20th century and harness it to achieve victory. So what the French did is they looked in the rearview mirror, and what worked for them in World War I, the Germans, because they had lost, said, okay, what do we need to do differently now that we have tanks, airplanes, radio? Okay, we're going to develop this new form of warfare, blitzkrieg, which comes full circle on my comments, comes back to mission command, mission type orders, where the chaos of the battlefield, human brain is working through that, but you got state-of-the-art technology to get you after the objective. So those are my comments after Joe's fantastic comments.
Well, that, you both gave us so much. We could do an 8-hour show on this. I think our host would yank the plug after our 50, 60 minutes. But holy cow, I mean, really great stuff. But, the last thing, Mike, that you talked about, I mean, let me be provocative here. It was a failure of the mind, right? As I think you said was the quote, right? To how they compensated for the technological and opportunity changes associated with World War I think is what you said. Okay. And that was around technology on the battlefield. But isn't today even aren't some of these battlefields a little bit even difficult to identify? And doesn't that put an even greater challenge on the mind? And I'll give you a great example. I got, 2 words, one company, SolarWinds. I mean, when we're getting hacked by an external agency, and I don't know if it's a country, I'm not making a claim. I wouldn't know who is doing the hacking, but is that an attack? Is that an attack on the United States? Is it actually a battlefield? What are the implications, Joe, from your mind in terms of the battlefield on the corporate front from these kind of threats? I mean, are these, I'm not trying to get into like a cyber only game, but we're talking about innovation and technology, which has always been used for good and bad, that could be used against us as a weapon. And are we even equipped to understand that it is being used as a weapon against us? Hopefully I'm being clear and provocative. What are your gentlemen's thoughts?
Yeah, I'll offer a few considerations. I think it's helpful, and I'm kind of a nut when it comes to thinking about things in time horizons. So if we think of point in time today against a lot of these threats, we'll call them, because I think any technology is either a weapon or a tool. That's kind of up to us as a species to figure out which it's going to be. But if you look at them on a longer time horizon, which I think we should, and you start to look at cyber over a 10-year decade, or quantum over a 10-year time span, AI over a 10-year time span, against our capacity as humans, right? These technologies evolve at an exponential rate. Our nervous system and our cognitive capacity doesn't really have the ability to evolve at an exponential rate, So and I'll take it away from cyber and put it more just at, I think like what you call the perception war, or you can't go anywhere and not see someone buried into their phone now, right? And our nervous systems as humans, our physiology is very vulnerable, right? And if you create the ability to have technology that is habit forming, which a lot of social media is, or if you have the ability to have deep fakes and to change the belief system or impact the physiology, we're tuned to be more reactive to fear than anything else. So you could argue right now we're divided as a nation more than we ever have been because of some of these threats, if you will, these battlefield threats that we may not even be conscious of, right? So getting back to that, it's a battle of the mindset. Companies don't transform, leaders transform. The aptitude or evolution of a company is a function of the level of thinking of its senior leaders. So, that is the literacy level of senior leaders as it comes to the new fuel sources for innovation, which it's inevitable that it's going to be influenced by technology. we can't argue that anymore, right? You think of retail today compared to pre-Amazon. You think of the word convenience and how that's changed. You can, basically get anything you want dropped to your doorstep in, 24 hours, 48 hours max. It's insanity, right? So all that is fueled by these new technologies. So I think there's a lot of surface areas that we can look at in terms of what are the battlefields. And I'm less versed in the military battlefield and more the consumer corporate battlefield, if you will. But at the end of the day, I think it comes to what is our mindset and how are we going to take advantage of every form and asset we have available to us. And we right now think cloud, social, and mobile. If you look at where we are as humans as a result of those things, we relate differently, we purchase differently, we consume differently. Our supply chains are fundamentally changed for forever. The next wave of technology makes that stuff look like, Lego blocks. And so it's fascinating to think of the implication of where that goes on a 10-year horizon.
Yeah, I think those are great comments, Joe. What I'd like to add to that is I think the problem that we have as a Western society, and specifically the United States, I'm talking the military, is if you look at our service academies when they were founded in the 1800s, they're engineer schools, right? They're not. It's all about science and math and STEM, and that's really important. I'll get to that in a second. But if we're looking at a near peer competitor, let's just say China, because that's the talk of the day is we're in competition with China. I think we tend to view that competition through too narrow a lens. And to Joe's very good point is, to me, it's all elements of national power: diplomatic, information, military, economic. And we tend to, I'm saying this to put a grenade on the floor, shrapnel, and then somebody come back at me from both of you. But my sensing is, and I'm no expert in the private sector, I've done some work with the private sector. I just think as a country, and this is obvious, blinding flash the obvious, we're always focused on the near-term profit, like right here. What can we do? And thank goodness, as Joe said, that large companies are putting billions into innovation, because we need to take, like the Chinese, the long view along those diplomatic, information, military, and economic, because we're actually in conflict already. It's just not conflict as we recognize it. Because in the old days, it was kinetic, bombs and bullets, and that was the start of the conflict. Whereas today, I think if you look at the various phases, because as a planner, you always put things in phases, but we're in phase what they call zero operations. But in terms of economic output, social advancements, influence in the Pacific, we're competing every day with the Chinese. And based on my time in China, it's limited, only 7 trips, military to military, but they're always envious that we had people like Joe, right? Because they always want to know what the secret sauce was to have leaders who were innovative and pushed innovation and focused on it, because their system obviously is a bit more hierarchical, a bit more dogmatic, and they were trying to inculcate that spirit of innovation. But then you see, and there's a long article in Wired magazine, and for a poli-sci major, it was challenging, but it talked about the Chinese with the rights to 5G. And in fact, there's a note today in today's news about that I believe, just based on discussions with people like you and Joe, that 5G, that's just one example of technology that the Chinese are really advancing in, is that you could embed AI in 5G and then have that ability again to turn the decision loop even faster. So I think the bottom line to this for me is we need to open our aperture and understand that we're in conflict now. And that doesn't mean that we're going to, it's kinetic, but it means we need to look at all elements of our national power and coordinate that in a way that, the Chinese and ourselves can coexist. We have mutual respect, but we're moving forward and we're reinforcing the things that the United States stands for. So back over to you two.
It's very interesting to me listening to this dialogue, because I think that the number one thing that affects corporations is that they often don't even recognize who their enemy is. I mean, they look at their traditional competitors and they say, oh, that's who I have to worry about. And then someone comes out of left field and, where'd this force come from? And I think even in what we were just discussing, I think to some extent, I think calling China a near peer is probably it's probably the right term, but it kind of misses the point. And so, Mike, I'll give you something to think about. From a kinetic perspective, the Chinese not long ago, what did they do? They launched their first aircraft carrier. That thing didn't last long before it sank, right? And it was beautiful, super high tech, and it ultimately sank. And it's because they didn't have the people, right? They didn't have the culture of the seafaring culture on these big, high technologically dependent systems and whatnot. And so even as they've released subsequent carriers that are high tech and beautiful, and they're doing better with them, I don't know from a kinetic perspective that they're a peer, and they might be a near peer or a not so near peer. However, for us to consider, what makes China a peer is their mindset. Let's go back to some of the things that both of you said, but it's their mindset of how they're thinking about these high-tech applications of artificial intelligence, and their willingness to accept the implications of the introduction of artificial intelligence and, again, advanced automation into their companies, their military, and their society. And I think that is actually an area that makes them much more than even just a near peer. I think they might be a peer or even beyond. Joe, at one point, I think said, well, the United States introduced everything that was, everything good about artificial intelligence in the sense that we led it. The United States led artificial intelligence in the development of it. Not all of it, for sure. And there's no national egotism here. There are some countries that are now doing better with it in terms of acceptance, adoption, and whatnot. So, just a thought. Are we sometimes focused on the wrong thing? Is the enemy sometimes? Do we have to be concerned with the forces that we don't see as much as the ones that we do see? Is it tanks? Is it planes? Is it the competitor that we've always known? Is it the Ford to General Motors? Is it the limo to the taxi cab? Or is it something altogether different? And how do we keep up with all this? Because to me, it's hard to run a company, all right? And now I got to worry about threats that aren't even on my radar. How the heck do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Christian, you remind me of a story that I try to frame a way to empathize what I think it's like to be a leader in some of these businesses. And the story I use is it's essentially like you when you're a leader in an industry that's been around for 50, 60 years plus. It's kind of like you're a world-class soccer player, right? You know the rules of the game. You got all the latest equipment. You've trained your whole life to become great at this. All your friends are soccer players. Everyone tells you you're phenomenal at it. You got awards and medals and just all this support structure. And your identity, when you wake up in the morning, you think, I am a soccer player. I was born to be this, and I've built my craft over my years. Well, now you got to go learn how to play violin, right? And what happens when you start looking to get into a new space? You don't know the tools. None of your friends do it. You're not getting any validation because you're bad at it. And you're having to learn a lot, and your identity is in conflict. I'm a soccer player, right? So as soon as you get a chance, you're kicking the ball again. You want to go back to that habituation that you had, and you calcified all these beliefs around you. So how do you break out of that world and start looking at what are the attributes and the proficiencies that we need to start to build into our leaders in the top layer, so that we begin to never calcify in that thing that we got so great. And you mentioned the word egoic there, and the fortification of the executive ego or the leader ego. That's super risky. Once you get ego, you're
super common.
Very
risky.
Yeah, very common.
It's the rule. It's the norm.
Yep, absolutely. So I think it's healthy to look at what are the attributes that we need to start developing in ourselves as leaders, role modeling into the organization, setting new standards. And one I will throw out just for sake of discussion is the ability to hold tension and polarity without attaching to it. So let's talk about China, right? We can really quickly become opinionated, and our nervous systems ramp up and we get defensive. Whereas if you start building the proficiency, I'm here to learn, right? I'm going to learn a lot more if I come into this really curious about what is it about their leaders? Yeah, how long of a time horizon do they think on? What's the background of their leaders? Where are they putting their money on a 10-year horizon? What proficiencies are they going to start to have? Because once you start looking at that and you can objectify, all right, well, they're kind of conditioning to play the new sport or the new capacity while still playing the old one, and able to get into both worlds. So I think that's, to me, when we think about new era of leaders, new era battlefield, what is the new boot camp and officer school and support structure that needs to be in place? And what proficiencies and what mindsets do we need to codify into those leaders?
Mike, you got to have some thoughts on that, because if anybody...
Oh, those were all, again, so much to think about. Because I think the thing is, if you look at military leadership in the past, a lot of it was physicality. I mean, because it's a tough business at the pointy end of the spear on an island in the Pacific or in Afghanistan or Iraq, or a young man or woman's, carrying 80 to 100 pounds. And there's a lot of physicality to it. But to Joe's point, I think in the future, and I think a lot of things have to change in education. I'll get to that in a second, in training and education. These are my views alone. Mike Dana's, not the military's, Mike Dana's views. Is I think that in a perfect world, you would grow leaders like the Thomas Jeffersons and George Washington. What I mean by that, I'm not being flippant, but it's to have a very varied educational experience. A little bit of humanities, a little bit of science, a little bit of high tech, speak a foreign language. I mean, a lot of different disciplines rolled into one. A little bit of psychology, perhaps, because you need a lot of different arrows in your quiver to lead innovation in the future. You can't just be the poli-sci major from Union College. You got to have a lot more than that. To Joe's point is, and the reason I was smiling and laughing so much, I was going, hey, that was me as a Marine. And now I'm trying to figure it out afterwards. And the way you figure out afterwards is you've got to expand your horizons and learn new things. And I just think that the leader that we make in the future, I think we're going to have to expose them to a lot more things, especially in the technological side, because those are going to be the tools, space, cyber, perception, that you'll be using, and you're going to have to choreograph to get there. The other quick thing is on the training and education. I was talking to Toby Redshaw, who's with Verizon. He's their 5G lead. He's Joe in your caliber. I mean, really fascinating man to talk to. But he talked about an event in Stanford where they were teaching classes, and it was on China. And it was like a 3-hour block. And it was what I call the upstate New York Catholic School PowerPoint, droning on instructor, Charlie Brown's teacher, and then at the end of the 3 hours, they did hey, how much did the students retain? So they gave a test. So it was at this level. Then they changed the curriculum where they intermixed short, very compelling videos that showed the instruction by audio. It was both. It was much more immersive, for lack of a better term. And when they did those videos intermixed with the traditional education delivery means, the retention was a factor times 5 increase. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because I think if you look at things like that, and then virtual reality, which, if you look at gamers, and this is one thing in the military we're starting to look at least when I left, is you look at the gaming industry and how they do games and they immerse themselves in that virtual reality. That would allow you the means in a modern battlefield, or let's say in a corporate scenario, where through the virtual reality means you could literally role play and war game everything in a very cognitively rich and robust environment, and understand, okay, this is what I'm going to see when I do go into the fight, because I've been able to. It's almost like Star Trek: The Hologram, but virtual reality tools are getting to that degree where you can immerse yourself in that, and then learn from it, and then apply those lessons learned. Food for thought.
It's a great segue. These conversations, we have a frame, everybody that's listening, we have a frame of what we want to get to. And of course, that's around this whole improvise, overcome and adapt mindset, and how it fuels innovation and invention. And this topic was really that bridge between, the future war, traditional battlefield, and then, how you have to innovate everywhere, companies, and militaries together. And so much of this has been around really, developing the right mindsets about the topic of leadership. And interestingly, not coming from Lieutenant General Mike Dana, but coming from Joe Boggio, innovator extraordinaire himself, who, by the way, now teaches leadership. So to me, it's kind of fascinating. So let me ask you a question that let me get a little bit more pointed. So the role of leadership in helping to create an environment or a capability, I think, as you might say, Mike and Joe, a capability where you can routinely, even continuously innovate. What might that look like? What are some of the characteristics? Do you have thoughts on that?
I had tons of thoughts on that, but what came up for me as you were going through that, Christian, was I'm always inspired by and have been intuitively drawn to the military as a place for the development of leadership capacity. You're a civilian, you go through boot camp, you're a Marine, and the change is unmistakable, right? You're a Marine, you go through officer school, you're a Marine officer, the change is unmistakable. And everyone I've met from the military says, I was in the service. My dad said, I spent my career in the service. And the aha for me in all this was, what does it mean to be in the service of something? Whether it's the military or your own personal purpose and mission, or your corporation's purpose and mission. But once you are in the service of something, there's a lot less you. There's a lot less ego. There's a lot more focus on what is it we serve. And I think, great leadership is very, very clear on what they are in the service of. And it's no longer about them. It's about building the capacity of the responsibilities needed of the leaders to drive the company forward. And I think there's also a commitment to developing your craft. I think you mentioned it very eloquently, Mike, that the capacity to learn, right? Having a learner's mindset. I think the farther you get into developing innovation capacities and proficiencies, the more you realize you still have to learn. I spent a career in this tech stuff. I know 2% of what I need to in terms of what's coming to feel safe advising. So it's, to me, the hardest part of all this, of building an organization and an environment, is creating this sense of purpose that is viscerally, deeply understood. And Christian, I think I'll quote you on something that everybody thinks the military is command and control. And I just told you to go run into the gunfire. You're gonna go do it because I'm your officer and I told you. It's like the amount of trust and love needed in those teams to where someone else's life and being in the service of something bigger than you is what compels you to run into harm, right? And so that to me is it's very uncommon, right? So I think the provocation I'd have back to you is you both graduated from being in the service. You viscerally felt it. Now what are you going to go? How do you apply that? How do you bring that forward? How do you teach others what you've lived? So anyway, that soapbox there, but that's what came up for me when you threw it out.
That's a great comments. So just to tag on to that, I would say that in terms of leadership and leading innovation, I think there's the characteristic attributes that you talked about. I think first, and Joe mentioned this, is being curious. You have it being somebody that is willing to explore other things. And the hard part is, in a normal given day, either in the corporate world, in the military, you're consumed with current operations, the disaster of the moment. But you need to carve out some time to be curious. The second thing is be modest. And this ties into something we talked about the last show, but you have to be a good listener, because that empowers people when you're a good listener. If you're the boss and you're at the head of the table and you're talking all the time, it sub-optimizes the people around the room. You need to be a good listener. Then lead from behind and give credit to others. I think that's really important because that way you neutralize antibodies against innovation if you give other folks credit, and that helps. I think you need to be pragmatic. And I know this one's maybe self-evident, but it's so easy to get just so enthused about innovation. But the truth is there's some really stupid ideas out there. And there's really some absolutely phenomenal ideas out there. But you have to have the moral courage to look somebody in the eye who's young and energetic and so passionate about what they're doing and say, hey, that's a great idea, but maybe not the right time. Let's get some other people to think about that and let's go on. I mean, you don't extinguish that innovation fire, but you have to temper it and be pragmatic and steer it in the right directions. So you're making good, informed resource prioritization decisions on which initiatives you think will take off. And then the last one I'd say is you need to be passionate, because nobody wants to work for Eeyore. All right. You don't want to go into work every day and, it's all about, this is one thing about the Marine Corps. It's all about attitude. Okay. And you determine your attitude and the people around you and the organization. And if you're enthusiastic and passionate, they're going to be enthusiastic and passionate. If you're not, they're not. And that's, leadership 101, but I think it's important in any organization. So over to you, too.
Well, I know, listening to you gentlemen. Joe, go ahead. It looks like you had something. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments on that, Mike. And it maybe just kind of the 5 areas that I've seen play a significant role as companies, and I've worked more with companies than militaries, but 5 things which I would call proficiency areas that if you get obsessed about as a company, these are the things I think give the most yield. So one is kind of your external focus. So if there's more innovation outside your 4 walls than in, and that's never, ever going to change. The amount of innovation outside is just getting more and more. So how much of your time as a senior leader are you looking out, spending time, really understanding what's going on? You mentioned additive manufacturing and, autonomous systems, things like that. Well, the people that are doing that would love to show you that. It's a wide open environment. So go spend time there, see what your competitors are doing, see what people who look nothing like you are doing, and in service of getting more outside in. And then the second is, can you ingest all that capacity? Do you have the ability? Do you have processes, ways of working, modern ways of working, agile, scaled agile frameworks, things like that? You have modern architectures in your technology such that you can, ingest all this AI, and you have the talent there to do it? Are you digitizing, sensorizing your products and, new ways of monetizing them? Are you flat out obsessed with your clients? Are you anticipating what challenges they're going to have? Are you pushing them ahead of them, knowing they need to be pushed to bring all these things forward? So those first 3 is where almost every company tends to over-index. The problem we have is we need more AI, right? We need more startups. We need we need an incubator. I need to hire somebody who's at Google. Like, all those things are necessary, but insufficient. And we go to the tactical thing that makes us feel good. So the last 2 come in, and they're the force multiplier, if you will. So one is cultural and the resilience of your culture. What is your appetite towards risk, right? And what do you stand for? What is that thing you're in service of? And then lastly, and I think most significantly, is the mindset of the executive leader. And if that leader is a learner, if they're obsessed with data, if they're obsessed with automation, if they're really setting the tone for the behaviors and the conduct that you're looking for in terms of those other 4 to really take flight, then you and view those all as proficiencies. Those are things that you will never get done getting good at. And just do an honest take of where are you in those 5 areas as an organization and as a leader. What is your mindset? And get curious about innovators who you admire and what their mindset is, because that's ultimately what you're competing against. I'd argue most large companies have the same access to all that technology supply as the Thai food restaurant, down the street from me does. everybody's got equal access now. So it's up to you to figure out how are you going to absorb it, and your mindset is the limiting factor.
Well, gentlemen, this is great. We're 51 minutes in, and I know we got another radio show coming up here with our host channel KGVI, and so we're going to have to cut off here. And I really don't want to. I mean, if I could, I would just say, hey, KGVI, cancel the next show because this could go on. I mean, this is good stuff. I mean, I'm scribbling notes here, and I couldn't keep up. Never get good enough at getting good enough. You said it differently, but I mean, what a potent thing that is. And I think that is such an important point here, because when it comes, whether you're in the military or not, you're corporate America or not, it doesn't matter. There is change around you, and there is no substitute with understanding the forces that are driving it and having a capacity to constructively deal with it, even take advantage of it, and to use a word that nobody likes, but is still very appropriate, even exploit it, right? And for corporations and the military units alike, it comes down to what you gentlemen said, right? It comes down to a fundamental capacity from a leadership perspective and from a cultural perspective to have an external view, and then a capacity to do something with that. And we've all seen the organization struggle, right? We've seen them struggle with the what I call a friend of mine calls, and I've adopted this, so I got to give credit here, the crack addiction of current revenue streams. Or in the military, the addiction of building big aircraft carriers. This is what we do. We've always done it. And the reality is the time and the place and the stage has been changed. You might have been that expert soccer player, Joe, and then they give you a violin or they throw you in the water. I mean, the whole landscape changes on you. How do you adapt? Having that mindset, having that ability to create an environment where people can innovate and do so, by the way, this is a key one. Hasn't been said, but it was both implied by both of you. An environment where you can fail and be rewarded for the opportunity to learn from that failure. I mean, this is what separates the great companies from everyone else. And this is why companies like, as we started this call, Google and Microsoft, what did you say, Joe? $2 billion and $1 billion respectively per month on innovation? Everyone talks about ROI, return on investment. It needs to be return on innovation. And those are two firms right there that can tell you that money is being well spent. And that is because they not just have the money, but they get the returns because, as you gentlemen both so eloquently said, they have the leadership capacity, they have the cultural capacity to ingest and employ what they learn to some great new value. Folks, we're going to move to wrapping this up. There's just one other thing I want to tee off on, a point here. This was brought to us by Lieutenant General Mike Dana and Joe together. They were talking about this whole idea of purpose. This is something that I think we need to explore in the future. If you look online, look at any number of different resources, you see something between 30% to up to 87% of our workforces are not engaged. They're not engaged. And at the same time, they work for firms that go, we don't have the resources to invest in innovation. Well, if you simply engaged your workforce, you would have more capacity than you would even know what to do with. Okay. But the question is, why aren't they engaged? Well, I'll give you something to think about, at least my perspective, and maybe a topic for another day. You know what they believe in? They believe in the paycheck they're getting, but they don't believe in the work they do. That is a fundamental leadership failure. That is also, I would think, a corporate governance issue as well. How do you make sure that everybody understands that what they're doing is important and how they're contributing to it? Do that and drive those engagement rates up. Find then the capacity that you need to innovate, and then have, of course, the leadership ability to address the culture and create the capability to ingest and then apply all this resources and all these innovations to great value to whatever market that you happen to want to address. So we're going to move to close, and I'd like to close with a question. I'm going to ask a serious one and a frivolous one. It's just a matter of who gets which one. The questions are going to be, what is the most amazing innovation you're seeing today? And the other person's going to get asked, what's the most frivolous innovation that you've seen that you're just like, why? I mean, why? And why, by the way, are people buying it? So I'm going to go to Mike. Why don't you give us one of the more what's a significantly important, serious innovation that really just kind of impressed you?
I'm gonna date myself, but I was in Stuttgart, Germany, at European Command, and there was a senior civilian leader who his innovation idea was to bring back lighter than air ships. Think Hindenburg, except don't think Hindenburg on fire. Right? And everybody back then just thought he was completely off his rocker. I mean, that he was just completely wrong. But if you look at the evolving technology and some of the prototypes they're coming up with, and how that could aid in transportation, just not military, but just cargo transportation, period. What I thought was a frivolous and ridiculous idea actually has some merit.
And what's old can be new again.
New, exactly.
And think about what you're talking about, Mike. You're talking about not just an old mode of transportation, but heavy lift without that sort of non-sustainable overhead that so many combustion engine type solutions otherwise have. So an innovation with efficiency and sustainability, which I think we all care about, or we should care about. So Joe, you get the frivolous question. So what is one of those things where you just feel like, oh, this is innovation, but holy cow, how dumb? Give us something that you just scratch your head about and go, why?
Yeah. I can't resist the urge to answer the first one too, though. So I'm going to do that quick. But there's two companies that I think are amazing. One is called HeartMath, and the other one's called Aura. And you can buy it. It's OURA, Aura Ring. But what they do is measure heart rate variability and help you to train that, which helps you to calm your nervous system essentially, and make you more capable of controlling your mindset. So I'll throw that out because I think
by the way, if you want to learn more about how to do that without technology, our United States Special Forces operators are experts in that. But that's a separate plug. And now on to the question you were at.
Box breathing, I'm going to answer it in a little odd way. Is the things that we thought were frivolous before the pandemic versus once we got into the pandemic. And I don't know if you noticed, but you know what the Flowbee is, right? You attach it. It's a hair cutting device that you attach to a vacuum cleaner, and you can shave your head at home with no mess, and it's just beautiful. Before the pandemic, nobody wanted a Flowbee, but as soon as the pandemic hit, you could buy them like they were sold out on Amazon. So that's my frivolous made, into highly beneficial because of stay at home.
Well, I just grew my hair, which I finally got a chance to cut. And then, of course, I probably needed a Flowbee for this because I got this unsightly facial hair. It just needs a little bit of work. So maybe when they get back in stock, I'll actually look into that frivolous one and see if I can put it to use on my chin here. Hey, folks, we're going to move to a wrap. I want to thank these incredible guests that we've had here today. I hope you got something out of listening to them. I mean, I know I did. And I actually consider myself a practitioner in a number of these subjects. And yet just so, as Joe would say, so much to learn. I mean, I learned a lot in this call, and I really appreciate you gentlemen sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, and your expertise. I want to also thank another military member or former military member, a gentleman by the name of Mike Shastine. He is the owner of an operator of Supreme Lending. He is the sponsor for our show here today, and he is a great American and great supporter of Vet Talks and Project Reload. Mike, best to you, and look him up on his website, by the way. He has got some impressive numbers and a great story about both his service and what he does post his military career. So, Mike, thank you. And I'm going to close here with a very specific call to action. If you listen to the show and you made it through this hour, just realize if you or your organization want help in bringing in amazing and often underutilized veteran talent into your organizations, please contact us at Vet Talks and Project Reload and help us help you get the talent that is going to keep you competitive. In fact, to this point, keep you innovative. All right. And then hopefully keep you in business. Best way to reach us is info@projectreload.com. That's info@projectrelo.org. Did I say com? I meant org, O-R-G, and or call us at 877-760-7356. Now, this is a radio show, And we are just kind of getting into YouTube and Facebook and whatnot. But if you do go there, listen to us, like us, love us, do that on LinkedIn too, because we're trying to build a LinkedIn presence as we finish up this episode here. Number 51 is now in the can with Vet Talks. Joe, Mike, thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you as well. And KGVI, thank you for hosting us. Everybody, make it a great day.